hold up. Find me, or either I find me a white t-shirt. And you know, this too cute. I mean, listen. Can you or not? Can I wear this to the PAP? To this TV? Give me a long pants, please. Yeah. If I wear this to the DIN, okay. If I wear this to the if I wear this to the PAP thing, is cannot you think cannot got blue workers party. Okay lah. Oh, but there are workers party there. There's okay, solid. Okay. Don't Okay, wait Okay, guys. Okay. All right.
Oh, finish already. All red color. Only Sengkang, Hougang, I think East Coast, Tampines,
T-shirt, right?
So let's say I think they basically what?
East Coast GRC what? Is the East Coast GRC out? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Our Workers' Party. No, we are waiting. We're waiting. Okay. We're waiting. East Coast and Jalan Kayu. That's one. That's one that's a bit scary. East Coast. Okay. East Coast.
The present moment, at this moment, 33.
Well, that would be East Coast would be very, very sad. Can I see some news? They're smiling. They're smiling at East Coast side. I don't know. Yeah. Nisu PAT 74%. No, that's Habib Singh. Okay. No. Sorry. That's wrong. So it's just comforting him. Okay. So I thought, yeah. You declared PAP. I declared like how many million times ago? Yeah. Jalan Kayu PAP 82%. Well done, man. Wow. Hey. 52%. Well done. Well done.
TV.
Okay. Well done. Okay, well done. Wow. Well done. PAP landslide is the word. Landslide. Okay, landslide. For those people who are so about PAP whatsoever, see the results. The Singaporean. The sample count against Andre Low from Workers' Party with. So do take note of that as we go into the next sample count. Let's take a look at this one. This is Sembawang GR's three-cornered fight. The PAP with 67% against. The NSP 2% and the SDP with 31%. Again, a strong lead for the PAP here, 67%. And I think that's all the sample counts we have for you at this point.
Thanks a lot for that, Angela. So let's kick things off with Sembawang first. We're just talking about social media, and actually, Mr. Ong Ye Kung is very active on social media. He's always posting videos, very savvy about his sports and all of that. So to a certain extent, do you think PAP has really upped their game in the social media sphere?
I think definitely, since the 2020 general election, they have upped their game. But I think, there are still, of course, room for improvement in certain areas as well. But by and large, they know where to target, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok as well. So I think that given them that sort of opportunity to reach out to more people, more voters, especially younger voters as well, who likes all these sort of, ways of reaching out to to their candidates.
Okay, hold on. We're going to reach out now to Olivia Seong, standing by with the latest. Ollie?
Actually, yes, we are here at the Yio Chu Kang Kang Stadium, which is the assembly point for the ruling People's Action Party. It is here where you can see behind me supporters and some of the candidates that have contested in the central, north, and south areas of Singapore have now gathered. And as the sample count results have come in, it was originally quite quiet and a relaxed mode, but as the results were announced and as people are watching it on a big screen right now, we have seen cheers erupt, as we have seen particularly the PAP pulling in more than 70% of the vote share in numerous constituencies for supporters here, including Marsiling UT, which is led by the PAP Secretary General, and Singapore's Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, his team pulling 74% of the vote there. Ang Mo Kio GRC as well, led by Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong, pulling in 79% of the vote for the PAP. And we also see Bishan Toa Payoh, Marymount, Kebun Baru also getting more than 60 to 70% of the vote share. And we know that PM Wong is expected to arrive here at Yio Chu Kang Stadium to address supporters sometime later this evening. We will be keeping a lookout for that. But who we have seen already enter this stadium are several key members of PM Wong's 4G team. We saw Health Minister Ong Ye Kung make his way in, and as he entered, he was greeted with cheers as he waved and shook hands with supporters who have gathered here. I asked him particularly about the sample poll result for Sembawang West SMC, and he had thrown his weight behind the PAP candidate there, Miss Polly Sun, who was up against the Singapore Democratic Party's chief, Chee Soon Juan. Miss Po getting 53% of the vote. I asked Mr. Ong what he thought of this sample count. He wouldn't say much, except that it was still too early to tell. I also want to talk about, we also saw Minister Chee Hong Tat, Transport Minister Chee Hong Tat also make his way here. He, for the first time, anchoring Bishan Toa Payoh GRC following the retirement of veteran and long
Yes, and Tampines GRC results here. These are the two that are quite important. Okay? Yeah, these are two quite important. Yeah, I'm going. Yeah, you know what? I should get to Gombak GRC and Gombak Stadium. Okay, just I don't know whether the live stream will survive. Okay, I need the results. I need the results for East Coast Win. Okay, so what do you mean by please change your live stream? Want to see what which one? Yeah, I'm trying to go to Gombak, but I need the results for East Coast and Tampines first. Okay, East Coast and Tampines. Yeah, I'm trying to rush to Gombak Stadium. Okay, see you changing. No lah, change my shirt. You all don't mind? I change my shirt. Okay. Wait for my. And then after doing hand, bring my PC, so just bring my hands and get ready to yeah. Bring a water. Okay. After come over, bring my hands here. Okay. And bring another water. Okay. Yeah. You can see my six pack. I got one big pack. I got six pack. Okay. So right now we want to see what is the results. Okay. We want to see what's the results for East Coast and Tampines and East Coast.
But regardless of the results, if we are elected, we will make sure that we put in our best effort. We'll work as a team. We will rejuvenate our town. We will make sure we improve.
There is no chance to lose. East Coast is the one. Okay, turn on effort. I cannot do that. I don't know how to do that. Can you please tell me? Sample results that the variance around. Okay. Maybe let's just say okay. Yeah. So can you please give me your best guess? Give me your best guess. Okay. Give me your best guess. East Coast GRC, how many percent? PAP. Okay, everybody please vote now. Okay, East Coast GRC, how many percent? Just type. Just type. Okay, East Coast GRC, how many percent? Okay, SKYC 54. Go on, go on, go on. East Coast 54. Okay, 50. Come on. East Coast 54, 60, 55, 50, 50, 53, 60. Okay, 66. No chance of 66. East Coast land 51. Well, so you all give 60%. That's great, man. Okay. Uh, I guess 55 or so. 55. Okay. 50, 52 to 53 to 55. 53 to 55. Uh, yeah. Okay, my guess 53 to 55. Okay, 53 to 55. That's actually very, very good. Very, very good. Okay, yeah. So, wait for East Coast. Wait, East Coast. Okay. Um, okay, 53, 50, 63. LinkedIn is a disgrace to Singapore politics. What percentage did LinkedIn get? What percentage did LinkedIn get? Okay, Andre Low disappointed. Okay, Andre Low fought against who? Andre Low fought Jalan Kayu, right? Okay, yeah. Oh, LinkedIn 8%. Gone, 13,500. Okay. Yeah, LinkedIn is a waste of time. Waste of time. Well done. Who is okay? Who is happy that LinkedIn is out? Say me, 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 me. Who is happy that LinkedIn loses deposit? Say me, 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 me. I type. Say me, me, me. Okay, me, me, me. Yeah, yeah, me too. Me, me, me. Okay. LinkedIn. I also type me. Okay. Yeah. Who is happy that LinkedIn is out? Say me, me, me. Oh, I'm so happy. Who is Lintian? The most irritating guy. Okay, yes, you agree, right? Yeah. Even you don't like PAP, you are hardly hate Lintian, man. Yeah. Okay. Yes. It's embarrassing 8%. Lintian come to my SMT sister. Yeah. Okay, the one parking. It's irritating is the word. Yes. Yeah, LinkedIn become LinkedIn. Yeah, he's very, very irritating, perpetually angry. I don't know why. He's just very, yeah. Me times 99999. Okay, I think he loses his deposit. Okay, yeah. So I would like to, can you make sure I will get a message and acknowledge? Okay, not all. Okay, uh, Mondrello is the smallest loser, so he can be NCMP as well. Okay, yeah, he can be NCMP as well. So I would say quite interesting. Okay, what kind of Jalan Besar GRC? I don't know. Yeah, so I'm very interested to Lulu. Good to see you. Okay, I'm very interested to see what happened to East Coast GRC and Tampines GRC. East Coast is out. I go. Okay, I quickly go to Gombak Stadium. Yeah, yeah. So okay, East Coast GRC, PAP, PAP. Yeah. You know, in in the stadium, everybody shouting workers money, workers money, gazillion people, right? I told you all how many times, right? Everybody still vote for PAP. Yeah. Okay. So okay. Yeah, I need to see East Coast GRC results. I need to see East Coast GRC results. Okay. Yeah. Go stadium clock 10,000 steps. I already clocked 16,000 steps already. Okay, today. I already clocked 16,000 steps. 16,000 steps. Okay. Everybody, every day, please clock at least 10,000. Good for help. Jeremy's score is 38%. Something is very, very good for Jeremy's score. Okay. So, yeah. Landslide victory, yes. Okay. Hougang Workers' Party 63%. Wow, that's very good. That's fantastic. Okay. I want to see East Coast, East Coast GRC. Okay, no, we want to see East Coast GRC. Hey, look, where are you? Okay, so surprise, Jeremy is a win already, man. It's a win. It's a win, okay? Yeah, it's a win already. 38% is a win. Okay? Yeah. Anything over 30% is a win for you. You guys are nobody, man. You want 38%, Yeah. It's quite amazing, right? Okay. I need to know, I really, how you got 16,000? Just keep walking. Anywhere I go, I keep walking. Okay? Waiting for people to come sample vote. Dr. Chi most likely will be an MC. I think so. DJ Bitcoin Power. Okay. It's good. Yeah. Okay. Jeremy results. Hougang out. PAP 37%. PAP, nobody expect, no? Nobody expect them to win Hougang. Okay. Jalan Sultan, sorry, Jalan Besar GRC is out. Okay. Jalan Besar GRC is out. No, today no info TLT. Today is all about politics. Today all about politics. So the results start. Wow, 75% vote. Well, this time around, really, landslide victory. Landslide victory. Okay, walk around anywhere as long as you walk around. As long as you walk, you just clock. Okay, yeah, my just clock. So most of the days I'll clock about 16, 17,000 steps. But make sure you hit 15,000. That will be great. Okay, yeah. So okay, guys. Okay, how? Okay, I'm gonna. If you don't mind, just tell everybody over to Hougang and please hold the turn around. I need to change. Can you let my wife just say hello to you? Okay. I got one big fan. Oh, her name is Dee. Okay, I get what. Okay, we call the computer a mock. Okay, you get the app. You get the app. You get the app. Yeah. I will see you downstairs. Okay, I'll be done. Yeah. Yeah. Promises do so quickly. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, Ben, thank you. Okay, we're gonna go right now to Bombard Stadium and thanks boy. Okay, I'll get this stuff from you later. Okay. Okay, we're gonna go. If my line drop off, I will restart again at the stadium. Okay. So please forgive me. But it is too exciting right now. So let's see whether Singtel network can tahan. Singtel network can tahan. Okay. Yeah. So you know what? I better. Yeah. I better. Yeah. So, okay. So okay. Let's go right now and see whether I'm checking out my house right now. Anybody got East Coast result? Anybody got East Coast result? Okay. I'm carrying a computer talk around. Yes, like this. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Let's go. Hey, you guys are here? You're watching, is it? Are you not here? You are watching. Okay. 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 Sorry, guys. So, okay. Can we try to the stadium and join you? I'm going down the bit. So as you all can see, I stay in the HDB. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Let's go on the way. Yeah. Okay. Watch party. I don't know whether they're still there actually. So famous. Okay. Tampines 53%. Well done. Okay. Well done. Tampines 53% of AP landslide victory. Landslide victory. Okay, now I need to see what's the result of East Coast. East Coast is the one. Tampines 53%. What is the split of the other guys? Focus Party, how many percent? Okay, NSP zero. Serious? Okay, okay, I'm going to signal might drop off. Okay? I'm in the lift right now. The signal might drop off. Please forgive me. Man, wow. Well done. Well done. Okay. It's supposed to be amazing. Okay, guys, video still hear me. Okay. East Coast 59% is amazing. Amazing. Wow, never drop. Wow, East Coast 59%. Outstanding. Outstanding. Trust me, guys. Landslide victory. Okay, landslide victory. East Coast. Landslide victory. Landslide victory. Okay, landslide victory. Well done, man. Landslide victory. How many hours we did 16 hours? About 2.5 hours, I think. Yeah, East Coast. Remember last time East Coast land? Yeah, East Coast land. Okay. Yeah. So East Coast. Yeah. So okay. Wow, East Coast 59% is amazing, man. So let's see, ready, man. No need to fight, ready. All win, ready. Okay, all win, ready. All win, ready. Okay, all win, all win. Yeah, all win, ready. Okay, I'm gonna see whether. Okay, I think there's nothing else. Tampines, can someone give me the split for Tampines? The split, 53, and what other parties win what points? Please let me know. I want to see the split. Okay, the split. Yeah. Uh, East Coast, wait, this can tell my wife that, okay, okay. Tampines GRC 53%, Workers' Party 46%, TPP 1%, NSP 0%. There is 0% one. Have you ever heard of 0%? 0%. Seriously, for zero one. I've never heard of zero. Wow. Okay. Wow. 0% is ridiculous, right? 0% is ridiculous, man. Wow, 0%. I never heard of 0% one. Oh my God, it's my God. Okay, 0% ridiculous. Okay, well done, man. Well done. Okay, very proud of ruling party. Okay, I'm going in the car right now. Okay, good luck, Stadium. Yeah, good luck, Stadium. Okay, well, okay, guys. Okay, so as you all can see, we are in the car right now going to good luck, Stadium. I don't know whether the guys are still there, so I better go there. Okay, yeah. Okay, just to sum up, PAP has won big time. Okay, big time. I think I'm very grateful to everybody who has got a very, how to say, very level-headed understanding to know that in the times of crisis like this, really, we really need to pick the best leaders to lead us out of this crisis. Okay, but everybody, after this whole G is over, there is no PAP supporters, there's no Workers' Party supporters, there's no PAP supporters. We are all one united country, okay, supporting. Okay, so I'm going over right now to Gombak Stadium and try to see where I can catch, whether I can catch Minister Desmond Lee and his team, okay, and cheer with them, okay. Later I'll see where I can live from there, okay. Later I'll see where I can live from there, okay. Yeah, why call it victory? Not taking back Sengkang. There is no way. It's not good that we have got zero opposition representation. It is actually not good for us. But to have Aljunied Sengkang is good enough. It's good enough. Hougang as well. What we were worried is we lose Punggol, we lose East Coast, and all this. Okay. All right, guys. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what I'll do is I will sign off right now. Later, if I can, I'll live stream from Gombak Stadium. Maybe as we rush. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys. Okay. See you guys. Yeah. Okay. Bye bye. Yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye.
中美关税战烧向全球，股市重挫，经济低迷，卫冕被征税，大马贸工部也上周飞到美国去谈判，谈成了什么？我们会被迫选边站吗？东南亚该何去何从？今天我们就请到副部长来为您解答。本节目由 DavidYeo 荣誉赞助播出，双清节送礼就送 DavidYeo。
中美关税战正在开打，那这个世界上呢，只有3个人会知道这场战争会走向什么。特朗普一定比欢迎，我们今天的贸工部副部长就是的哦，耶！哇，今天你非常的忙哦，因为行程太满，所以我们特地来到了你的座位啊。我听你的助理跟我讲，就是最近我是排到很忙啊，一直会被很多媒体赶。这件事情会手忙脚乱。
其实马来西亚的应对是相当的平和的，就是4月2号发生的，那是刚刚好在这月吧。但是大家多少是有一些预期，只是不知道特朗普去到什么程度。前面的说，为什么你们不急呢？为什么你们不快点去美国？
啊，对，很多人打到白宫的电话。
对，为什么你不急？但是我们从一开始就说，我们要很平和的一步一步去处理。
是对的嘛？这个。
因为你从这个月都还没结束，我们今天是4月29号，走下来看了，上个星期贸工部长他说在美国会见了商务部长，还有美国贸易代表，这样认真谈了一回。你们现在看形势就很清楚。我们当然知道这个是历史上80年来最大的变化。特朗普一下子做的事情，如果你很急的去应对，它还是变化嘛。因为这个是还在变化。
当时候特朗普做了第一波的关税战的这个拿着2个板，然后讲政府的一些 tax 的时候，你们的反应在党才是说，哎呦，谁要中招，还是媒体预料到？
我们因为它不是针对马来西亚，针对只有企鹅的岛，它也针对嘛。我们也没有很急嘛。
你会觉得是一个
因为特朗普他是讲从80年代开始就有在谈关税。
80年代，对，好像是做总统。
他当时在1987年花了10万块美元，在所有美国主要的报章刊登广告，刊登个人广告去骂日本，然后讲日本对美国倾销，日本把美国的工业摧毁，美国要对日本施加高关税。他认为关税是一个武器，关税是一个美国最重要的这个手段。这个是他40年来都这样子。他这一次做的时候呢，他是同时要做3件事情，可是做太快。第一件就是说，通过关税跟中国切割，跟中国就是说同时又要增加税收，国内要减税，然后要设立对外的这个税收单位，通过关税来减少国内的这个税收。这个说法其实不容易成立。第三，他又想要就是美国在外的工业，还有别的国家的工业能够回到境内。那如果这3件事情它是分10年或者用4年或者用8年来做呢，然后一步一步做，不一定是错的。从他的角度来讲，因为美国的确是去工业化以后，很多中部的这个中属美国人本来是有工业小城全部都没有的工作。可是呢，他一次过这样做的时候呢，谁将承担成本？可能是美国的消费者。第二就是从马来西亚出口到美国的很多其实是美资拥有的公司，在这里生产了，然后最后回到去美国，所以美资可能是第2个最大的受影响的单位。那再下来当然是我们的就业等等。那么所以这个当时我们的评估就是，第一，你说有很紧张吗？第一，因为它不是针对马来西亚，它是针对包括有企鹅的这个岛。第二，它的目的有很多，可是我们不确定它的手段。那后来知道它一次过要做完，一次过做完就困难，因为一次过做完它就影响到美国的消费者，也没有办法一下子重组吧。现在是全世界供应链拉得很长，这样的供应链你要砍就是这个是20年后30年形成的供应链史，就是有一些是从比如说 Intel 是1972年到布森。这个50几年的供应链，就是说你要砍就砍。当时他在处理之后，可能他也没有算清楚。
所以意思就是讲，当你知道还要一次过做更多东西，
对，因为我们觉得是它会变化，
变化就是
它变化有几个嘛。第一个就是说，中国会反应，这个现在基本上是完全透过嘛。但是你实际上生活上不能透过，最后谁给谁下
没有办法脱钩的供应链可能是在豁免，
所以他就豁免手机了。我一直大概知道苹果的供应链啊，大概都知道大概在哪里来了。我后来在报章上看到，才知道那个数据有多大。每一年世界向美国供应5500万台苹果手机，
多
对，所以这个5500万台啊，你要砍断啊，就算不要讲说砍断了，从中国要移到印度啊，苹果想用它的想法，在中国生产要去美国的苹果手机转到印度去生产，这个最少要3年才能完成的工作，不是说今天你要转就转哦，你的厂房的工人呢、水呢、电呢、港口呢，还有运输的，这个不是说今天你要转就转。
所以按照你的想法，就是虽然表面上大家持续在升级，但实际上能动的
也不是说能动的东西不多，因为它会有很多马上会有变化。这个医药手套美国生产不多，很少美国国内生产，然后主要的生产商是中国跟马来西亚，然后因为是医药手套，所以医药手套它的那个供求其实是相对来说没有办法一下子调的，突然加的，所以最后就是美国消费者承担的，不管就是说，但是它只要是2个大的供应商。中国可能就变成很贵了哦。马来西亚相对来说，就算有关税，可能马来西亚的厂商反而可能是生意会增加。
既然聊到这里，也是想问一下，就是你觉得马来西亚在这次贸易战当中会获得机会多？
我们准备要面对未来12个月到18个月，全世界都要面对的问题。我现在全世界想要面对的问题，全世界想要面对3个大的挑战。第一个大的挑战就是这样的供应链的最大的问题是不稳定性，因为你不知道明天会怎么样变化。因为供应链的不稳定，全球的需求会降低。就是说，你本来这个货船到海上就倒下去，倒在里面，因为他不知道，如果是他这个145%的关税去到美国，谁来报啊？你要想，比如说这个产品去到美国的关口，本来这个关口来拿的人他付20%税啊，现在他要付100%，他是要拿现钱出来付的。那谁有一下子一个货柜，比如说一个货柜是$1000万，你就要拿出
1400万，
比如说货更高的话，谁有那个现款？第二个就是说，整个这样变化下去，美国会出现萧条。当然，技术萧条的意思是说，2个季度如果萧条，就算是萧条。这个技术萧条了。如果就国际需求降低，然后跟着美国国内需求又因为萧条而降低，那么再加上呢，就是中国也好，越南也好，马来西亚也好，印尼也好，巴西也好，我们本来要运去美国卖去美国的产品，不只是这些国家，还有新兴国家，比如说欧洲，比如说日本和韩国，他们也是以美国为主要市场。这些国家本来要去美国的产品，他现在不知道美国还要不要他的产品，这个产品去哪里呢？会不会大家足底竞争？race to the bottom，今天我卖10块，我拿回本就好了。要钱不要货。如果大家都要钱不要货啊，那么就是说不算成本来做的时候，这样子就是变成大家主体了，就一直往下拉。
跟观众讲有什么问题？因为好像买便宜货挺好的。
你每个人一直都买更便宜的货的时候，到最后谁有工作做？本来马来西亚的工厂他没有办法出口美国，然后跟着美国又萧条，别人卖的产品，比如日本来的、中国来的、韩国来的，比马来西亚卖的便宜，大家就一直竞争价钱的时候，到最后日本的人也没有工作做，中国人也没有工作做，马来西亚没有工作做，这样你就是全球萧条。这我刚刚说的是最坏的可能，但是马来西亚的也可能有一些空间。那空间在于第一，特朗普最后他可能他3个目的，我刚说，他可能到最后我 OK 了，我暂时只做一个，那你做哪一个？那可能到最后每个人收18%，这样子这个美国的消费者承担多18%的这个消费，不见得会影响到所有人。第二，马来西亚的经济也相对多元，就是马来西亚不纯粹只是靠出口一个产品，马来西亚也不只是靠出口一个种类的产品。比如说，我们对美国主要的出口呢是半导体，当然现在是没有关系的，半导体是 exempt 的后面。第二是所有的面衣，就是非半导体的电子电机产品，这个是有关系的。第3块是像手套啊，或者家私啊，这些 是原产品做底的这个产品，当然价势可能受影响比较大。手套，因为它可能它跟中国竞争，说不定它可能还是有一些空间，可能有好处也大。说因为我们对美国的出口本来就多元，我们本身的经济也相对多元，因为我们有中有石油，我们也有工业，我们也有服务业，我们的服务业也相对大。再下来呢？现在也来到一个历史时刻，其实这个历史时刻是过去我们大家都当做美国是唯一的出口对象。第二次世界大战以后呢，就是靠出口美国发达的，从日本到四小龙，就是香港、台湾、韩国、新加坡，然后到四小龙，马来西亚、泰国、印尼、菲律宾，然后到越南、到中国，都是靠出口美国富裕的啊，靠出口美国富裕。那现在来到一个历史时刻，美国说我不想出口，对我出口。有趣的情况就是，这个世界又不只是美国人有钱，中国其实也是有钱，因为它有一个很大的消费市场。中国在2001年只有1亿人口算是中产阶级，但是现在至少有4亿人口算是中产阶级。虽然过去3年来中国的需求是很低，因为很多人不确定未来会怎么样。不过按我们接触一些中国朋友啊，还有就是让我们对经济的一些分析，这一次的贸易战，还有今年头 DeepSeek 的这个推出，还有去年10月中国政府开始救市大放水，这一系列的这个变化，反而中国现在的情绪，就是这民众的对经济的观感跟情绪是有趣的好，虽然没有到2020年COVID以前的那个，因为有一代人从1992年邓小平来去，一直到COVID，有一代人中国人都相信明年会比今年好，下一代一定过得比这一代好。但是现在过去几年很多人躺平了，所以中国是一个市场。当然，我们希望中国能够更加提振国内内需，因为中国提振国内内需，它就可能减少对出口的依赖，那可能对我们的这个对东南亚还有对其他国家的这个挤压就相对减少。那么当然还有世界上还有不止中国有钱吧，像现在比如说欧洲。欧盟很长的时间呢是财政紧缩，但是如果你注意到德国新政府现在在国会修改了那个对开销的限制，至少在国防开销是无限啊，所以这个就对整个经济有不一样的这个影响，因为它需求大。当然我们不希望一个世界是最后大家全部来提升国防需求啊，那个就变成回到去1930年，我们前面担心是什么？担心就是说。今天大家都主体竞争，然后大家最后为了需求就去提高国防需求，最后的结果就是1930年，就是关税战变成了战争。所以现在比如说首相今年通过东盟主席国要推的，我们在5月底会有东盟还有这个海湾合作组织和中国的对话峰会。为什么首相一直去不同的国家访问？为什么去中亚国家？为什么现在特别重视要把马来西亚变成海湾国家，就是中东海湾国家跟中国的对接的主要就是因为我们一直相信说，这个世界的经济秩序可能世界的秩序已经面对二战80年来巨大的变化，从本来只靠美国一家，到现在靠几家。马来西亚不一定是在最坏的情况，如果是说我们也能够促成马来西亚成为新的世界秩序的这个中转站，比如今天我们可以把中东跟中国一起，然后同时呢，东盟国家如果未来可以富起来，它能够像中国这样子创造一个中产阶级，东盟本身就是一个很大的市场。
所以意思就是讲说，今天美国它想要用关税保护主义来完成一的手段，结果其他的国家就也是有一个机会，就是我们直接断开对美国的依赖，自己组成另外一个经济。
这样也不是，对，因为它这个过程一定很困难。它未来12个月到18个月，它肯定会有很多的这个不稳定性、不确定性，而且可能全球需求都会降低。但是如果可以在这个危机里面呢，就是说我们还是要有美国市场，但是我们要逐渐的扩大跟其他的经济合作。如果我们跟中国的经济合作，我们跟东盟的经济合作，我们跟欧盟还有跟阿拉伯国家的经济合作能够加强，这些其实都是市场，而且只要这些国家它的经济都没有崩盘它可能有错 开的需求。那一个国家经济越多元，这个经济关系越多元复杂，相对来说的话，就是你的风险就分散了。马来西亚政府最大的经济的工作就是怎么样把我们的经济变成更多元，而且跟我们的经济关系变成更多方面多项。所以这是首相在上海人为什么他一直出访，这就是要开拓新的这个经济关系。
而且这种出访真的是一个原来还怎么跟他我买这个东西可以买回来。
张主任，我的打工人压力越堆越大，今天队都快不行了。我要请病假。
啊？怎么今天也生病啊？
医院最近电脑10几个小时后，还有患者肩颈背重寒症。
腰酸背痛就讲腰酸背痛啦，这是不难听。我有好介绍 ，Let's go。看看呐，这台就是我为公司大家买的金条按摩椅啦。有了这个方式，不会一直到有请下来。来，赶快试一下好不好？来，快点。这个全新的金跳比 Bravo 2按摩椅非常厉害，从颈到腿全身都可以照顾你。3D 滚轮深层按摩，任何酸痛一按就松。还有 AI 声控，触控你12种模式，你想按哪里它就按哪里。PPT 的观众朋友们，好康来了！现在这台金跳比 Bravo 2按摩椅原价14988，但是他们给你直播特别优惠价，448，超夸张，真的很划算！赶快点击下方的WhatsApp链接来继续跟着讲。
而且是真的很舒服，我现在感觉全身都轻飘飘了。双情节快到了，赶快买台回家孝敬年老吧。
双情节要到了，你知道吗？金票还为大家特别准备了双情节特别优惠活动哦！要在5月5号到7月31号之间下单，那你就有机会赢取一台 BYD Lion 7的电车哦，还有总价值高达100万的奖品等你来领取的。
哇，这种好康绝对不要错过哦！
金票放松就这么简单。
双庆节送礼就送金票按摩椅。
其实我很好奇，这种出访真的是有效果。原来他怎么跟他谈？我买这个东西可以买回来吗？
有高仿的，这叫高仿啊，就是高官的访问，他领袖跟领袖见一次面，下面的官员最少要用几个月来准备嘛，双方的官员，他一定要准备议程，然后准备这个合作。为什么需要高仿？是因为你要把所有东西串起来，当然有一些是你不一定能够做到很多，但是有一些关系是没有高仿，可能就不会有那种变化。我举个例子，2023年11月，当时候的荷兰总理来访问，那他来访问过后就跟首相谈半导体。荷兰是一个半导体器材一个重要的 ASML 就是在荷兰，但是他国家人口不是很多，所以他其实是跟我们有很多对接的可能。这个高仿他带了200多家公司，然后对，然后他就是说跟我们，他影响到我们，觉得说半导体是我们要用国家的方式，不只是纯粹靠私人投资，是要国家要有政策，要有配套，要有影响。所以后来我们在2024年的时候，推出半导体战略，很大程度上是跟这些高仿前面的对话，影响到国家政策的对话。企业跟企业对了，他没有国家对国家的对的时候，政策配套不到。但是现在就是说，至少我们在半导体上面，我们跟这个荷兰，我们跟其他一些国家，比如说巴西这个半导体的对接，还有现在因为阿联酋。
To retain it, I think where the surprise is the margin of victory, which is 70%, a huge jump from 2020 general election.
I mean, if we look at GE 2020, Gao Xiaowang won about 55% of the vote against another PSP candidate, that was Dr. Ang Yong-guan. I mean, clearly she has done better this time round. I mean, what went wrong for the PSP in this contest?
I think fielding a different person, that could be one of the reasons. And also, I'm not too sure whether it's a PSP fault or, that the PAP has done a good job. It was 5 years, that was during the pandemic as well. And 5 years later, I think residents there can really tell what the PAP has done for them. And I think this is translating to the votes as we have seen over here.
I mean, I would attribute the result more to the performance of Ms. Gunn rather than the performance of the PSP candidate.
I guess she's had those years to be on the ground. You know, people have come to know her. They've met her. They've seen her. Jeffrey, wow, you know, probably, I don't know. I mean, I don't live in that area, but because he's a new face, he would have to struggle with that uphill task of getting to know people and not have a very long runway for that.
I think that's the problem with a lot of opposition when they are going into a contest. A lot of times they have not really walked the ground, with the exception of some of them. You know, but again, residents must start all over again with a new individual in a contest like that.
Is that something the opposition parties need to look at in terms of their strategy? It needs to be a long-term plan. They need to be in it for the long haul, fielding the same faces now, 5 years later, maybe even 10 years later, right?
I mean, it is a continuous process. So any party that's a serious party would do that. The staying power has to be there.
Yeah.
In spite of not winning, you want to stay there and then try and get over the line in subsequent elections. And I think that speaks well to a credible party.
I mean, in the case of PSP, it seems like based on the sample counts and this official result, they have failed to make any inroads in this election. And what kind of questions or discussions would they have to make after this election? What will happen to the party?
That's a good question. You know, what would happen to the party? I think even if you look at it, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock is not going to run again. Will he still be in the party? I mean, he's just been voted into the CEC of the PSP. So will that be a continuation? Would he be able to find new blood for the PSP? What's the agenda? What's the objective of the PSP moving forward as well?
Okay, any moment now we're expecting more results to come in. That's why we've got the that picture in your screens. But Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, I mean, the effect of having him there, I mean, that allure, I guess, is it going to carry on because the renewal hasn't been very sustainable?
Short answer, no.
Okay.
I think Dr. Tan Cheng Bock came on as a very strong personality. He was there from day one in 2020. But, you know, after this, where will he be? I think that's the question.
Yeah, I think that someone else has to carry the torch.
Yeah.
I think
there's someone else?
That's the big question here for the PSP. So I think Dr. Tan has taken the party as far as he can. And I think it would now rely
with the it was like a whole vlog of like my rabbit and the workers at some rally, and I was just like, that's one way of getting
And now we'll have a graph of all the sample count numbers that we have earlier. So let's take a quick look at the 32 constituencies that we've just covered. Now, starting with Aljunied GRC, this is a Workers' Party stronghold. WP with 59% against PAP with 41%. And coming up next, we have Ang Mo Kio GRC, a PAP stronghold, this time helmed by Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. 79% of the votes against the PPP with 10%. And now we'll have a graph of all the sample count numbers that we have earlier. So let's take a quick look at the 32 constituencies that we've just covered. Now, starting with Aljunied GRC, this is a Workers' Party stronghold. WP with 59% against PAP with 41%. And coming up next, we have Ang Mo Kio DavidYeo GRC, a PAP stronghold this time, helmed by Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. 79% of the votes against the PPP with 10% and SUP with 11%. Next up, we have Bukit Gombak SMC. The PAP pulling strongly as well, 75% against the PSP's Harish Pillay with 25%. Bukit Panjang SMC, a closely watched one, but the PAP taking this one for now at 62% against SDP's Paul Tumbaya, 38%. Again, this is a sample count, so do take note of that, and we'll wait for the results to come in. Bishan Toa GRC, another stronghold for the PAP. The PAP team led by Chi Hong Tat has 75% of the sample count against SPP's 25%. And Choa Chu Kang GRC, PAP with 63% against PSP's 37%. And next up, East Coast GRC, a closely watched constituency, PAP with 59% against Workers' Party, taking 41% of the sample count. And Hokang SMC, 63% of the votes go to Workers' Party's Dennis Tan and 37% to Marshall Lip from the PAP. Next up, Holland Bukit Timah GRC, a strong 80% goes to the PAP team against Red Dot United's 20%. And up next, let's look at Jalan Besar GRC, 75%, another strong lead for the PAP against PAR's 25%. And again, let's look at Jurong Central SMC, a new SMC here. Sia Yao Chuan pulling very strongly, 81% for the PAP against Red Dot United's Kala Manikam with 19% of the sample count. Jurong East Bukit Batok GRC, a newly carved GRC, PAP's team led by Grace Fu with 76% of the sample count against RD's 24%. And a close fight here, Jalan Kayu SMC. PAP's Ng Chee Meng, 52% of the sample count against Andre Lo's 48%. This falls within the margin of error of up to 5%. And Kebun Baru SMC now, Henry Craig, 66%. PSP's Tony Tan with a 34%. Up next, Mountbatten SMC. The PAP newcomer Goh Sik-hee, 62% of the sample count, and Jeremy Tan, an independent candidate, taking 38% of the sample count. Marymount SMC, Gan Xiao Huang from the PAP with 71% of the votes against PSP's Jeffrey Koo with 29%. And let's take a look at more sample count numbers that we have for you. Marsiling UT GRC, helmed by Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, 74% of the sample count against SDP's 26%. And in Nee Soon GRC, another strong lead, 74% to the PAP against RDU's 26%. More numbers for you. Pongo GRC, a closely watched one, a close fight here, 54% to the PAP, the Workers' Party with 46%. In Pasir Ris Changi GRC, a new GRC, the team led by Indrani Raja, 67% against SDA's 33%. And in Pioneer SMC, PAP's Patrick Tay with 66% and 34% goes to PSP newcomer Stephanie Tan. In Potong Pasir SMC, the three-cornered fight, PAP's Alex Yeo with 71%, PAR 8%, and SPP with 21% of the sample count. In Queenstown SMC, a strong lead for Eric Chua, the PAP 82% against PAR's Mahabub Bacha with 18%. Radin Mas SMC, this three-cornered fight goes to the PAP, 69% for Melvin Yong, independent candidate Darryl Low with 24% and PAR with 7%. And Sembawang GRC, now another three-cornered fight, the PAP taking 67%, the SDP with 31% and NSP with just 2% of the sample count. Next up, Sembawang West SMC, another close contest here. PAP's Poli San just pulling slightly ahead with 53%, and the SDP's Chee Sun John with 47%. In Sengkang GRC, the WP seem to be keeping their votes 56% against PAP's 44%. And next up, Tampines Changkat SMC, a new SMC here, another close fight. Desmond Chu from PAP with 55%, the Workers' Party taking 45% here. Tampines GRC, the only four-cornered fight in this election. The PAP with 53% of the sample count, the Workers' Party here with 46%, the PDP with 1%, and the NSP with 0% of the sample count. In Tanjung Pagar GRC, a strong lead for the PAP, 81% and 19% for PAR. West Coast Jurong West GRC, another key battleground, PAP with 61% and the PSP with 39%. And the final one, favoring Yeo Chu Kang SNC, a strong lead by the PAP, Yip Wan Wei with 76% and PAR's Michael Fung with 24%. And that's a wrap of the sample count numbers that we have for you at the moment.
It's May 1st, the final day of hustings. If this is your first time catching the show, I'm
kind of makes me resonate with the candidates as well, right? Like, like them being like in the public eye. And I think one thing that will resonate with me is that, like, I think what I mentioned earlier, it's just like we're all human. Yeah.
DPM Gun can still continue to contribute to Singapore, even if he's not a political officer.
Okay, maybe for me, I think, I don't know whether this will like resonate with y'all, but like I think being in the media and like putting yourself out there, it kind of makes me resonate with the candidates as well, right? Like, like them being like in the public eye. And I think one thing that will resonate with me is that, like, I think what I mentioned earlier, it's just like we're all human. And like it's not easy to put yourself out there. I think like even as like a video journalist myself, like sometimes like you can get boggled down by like really mean comments and things like that. So I think one lesson is just to like be kind. Just like be kind to like your candidates, even if you don't like agree. I think there's always like a way to formulate your thoughts and your opinions in a kind way. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you know, we're all just human, and the candidates are like human also. I think that's like my takeaway. As cliche as it sounds, lah. Yeah, not really related to GE, but just like on an emotional side, on an emotional level. For me, I
think that's very important because we have seen how, you know, it can get very polarizing, especially online. So I think just remembering that every candidate and every other person expressing a view online is also someone else who has a family and who has genuine valid concerns about, you know, certain issues, and just trying to see the other person as a fellow human being and not so much as, you know, someone who is necessarily someone adversarial or someone that you're going up against, and just making space for that debate to happen and exchanging views in a fair and I guess compassionate way.
Christy, what was your takeaway?
I think what I mentioned earlier about how like it about staying informed throughout all 5 years leading up to general election, because it can feel a bit like you're playing catch up in those 9 days.
And did it get overwhelming?
Yes, I think it got really overwhelming. Like there's always like a new development, there's always a new story. Like what happened on this walkabout, what happened here? Like there's this drama, this scandal, and I think it is really hard to kind of cut through the noise and figure out like what is the main thing that we need to focus on.
All right. Thank you very much for being here. What will you be doing on polling day? Well, Christy's not voting.
Voting.
Yeah, voting. But what wise will you be at? Any rallies, Isabel?
I don't think so. I think I'll be in office doing all the clip outs that you guys see online for social media and all the memes as well. Yeah, for GE, that's what I'm doing on polling day.
All right. Yang and Christy, will you be creating more videos?
I think we're going back to our
day job. The day job.
And we're gonna be at the polling centers, things, and
all right. It's back to life as usual. So after May 3rd,
But thank you very much for being here and sharing your point of view of, experiencing the GE as reporters and first-time voters. Thank you very much. It's cooling off day tomorrow, but on May 3rd, Singapore goes to the polls. I'll be back on polling day at 7:50 p.m. with my co-host Olivia Quay to take you through the results of GE 2025. We'll also discuss the election with 3 panelists who will break down how things unfolded in key GRCs and SMCs and what it all means. So, for now, it's a wrap on the special run of The Usual Place. I'm legit sad that this is the last episode of the GE series. It's been a long 9 days, but I've loved bringing you on for the ride. And a big thank you to all the guests who have dropped by the couch on The Usual Place, and for you for spending your lunchtime with me. I'll see you again at The Usual Place when we're back to regular programming. See you. Bye. From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Tonight, the longest winning streak in over 20 years. Stocks rising for a 9th straight day, marking a full recovery exactly 1 month after the president's Liberation Day tariff announcement that made those markets nosedive. How potential easing trade tensions with China and a stronger than expected jobs report factor into the rally coming up. Plus, the fate of Trump's newly unveiled budget and long-sought tax cuts on Capitol Hill, when Republican Congressman and Financial Services Committee member Mike Flood of Nebraska joins us. And we'll get to the marathon race for a prized Michigan Senate seat.
We have to be thoughtful as we put policy forward and not have this approach that I think we've seen out of the Trump administration of ready, fire, aim.
Our conversation with Michigan State Senator Mallory McMurrow, her call for a new generation of elected officials, and how she aims to push the current administration up ahead. But we kick off the show on this Friday on today's rally and its drivers, with our Bloomberg reporters covering it on several fronts from Washington to New York. And it's in New York that we begin as we turn to Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick at our worldwide headquarters. Romaine, we just completed the longest winning streak on the S&P 500 since 2004, and 2 days ago, President Trump said this is still Joe Biden's stock market.
Yeah, well, what a difference 4 weeks can make, Kaylee Lyons. You might want to take that back after seeing the results that we got today and really on the week. And S&P 500 rallying about 1.5% on the day, more than 3% on the week. And all of the other major U.S. indices saw similar gains. But a lot of people are really talking about this streak. 9 straight days now that the S&P 500 has risen, completely recouping all of the losses that were sparked by that Liberation Day announcement. It has been that tamp down in rhetoric on the trade front. It has been the idea that maybe there is indeed progress on potential negotiations, whether it's with China, with the EU, and some of the other major countries, that indeed might actually be what's driving stocks higher. However, Kaylee, the big asterisk, and of course the big bugaboo, is that despite this sort of round trip we've taken from where we were pre-Liberation Day to where we were just a few weeks ago to where we are now, is that, well, since the start of the year and, well, since the start of this administration, the markets are still in the red. So there is still some room to go, Kaylee. But if we start to see sentiment shift the way it shifted over these past 9 days, then maybe you can bank on additional gains.
Well, I guess we'll see when it comes to the equity market. Meantime, in the bond market today, striking to see a 13 basis point move higher on the 2-year Treasury yield to 3.82, just after the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the 2-year was signaling the market thinks the Fed should cut rates. That decision is looming next week. Romaine, what kind of catalyst could it be?
Well, I can tell you right now, the swaps and options markets completely disagree. In fact, they're actually starting to price out some of those rate cuts that had been priced in just a little while ago, and that's largely because of the economic data, Kaylee. At the end of the day, the Fed, if you believe what they say, is driven by the data, not by political pressure. And the data that we got this week, including that GDP report that, yes, I know on the top line was bad, but when you look at the monthly personal income and spending numbers, when you look at the labor market data that we got today here, you have an economy that, at least on the surface, does appear to be resilient. Consumer spending is still there, business investment is still there, and that means, at least for right now, the labor market might hold up, and that just might be enough for the Fed to, well, just not do anything, Kaylee.
Well, we'll see how President Trump feels if that's what they decide to do. Is nothing. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostic joining us from New York. Thank you so much. And joining me now with the latest from the White House is Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson here in Washington. And Wendy, we've been hearing from the White House for weeks now a suggestion that they are talking to China, or at the very least want to talk to China to try to make a trade deal. And just within the last 24 hours, it seems that we're actually now really talking, including on the Chinese side. The Commerce Ministry saying that they're evaluating the prospect of opening negotiations. Some reporting from the Wall Street Journal today that they're looking at fentanyl specifically to try to open a door here. Is this the first real sign of progress?
It very well might be. I mean, there is just what you said. They are now talking about talking, which is the first step toward any negotiation. This is what has concerned people when the president says, I'm going to make all these deals in a week or two, because trade deals take months, if not years. And first you have to talk about talking. Then you have to talk about what you're going to talk about. Then you're going to have to talk about where you're going to talk and who's going to talk. And so the Chinese officials today were talking about finding the people to talk about, finding the subjects to talk about. And they want the talks to be traditional in the sense that they will start with relatively low-level staff, and then they will move up and up and up to the heads of state. Trump doesn't operate that way, and I can foresee some complications here. Trump wants to be the one in the room with Xi Jinping, and the two of them work it out. And that's just not how the Chinese see these things working. So, well, I think there's a little bit of ways to go, but the thawing on the Chinese side today was incredibly significant.
So the president may not be finding himself in a room with Xi Jinping anytime soon, but he will on Tuesday find himself in the White House with the newly firmly elected Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, who had this to say about his planned trip to Washington on Tuesday.
We're meeting as heads of our government to discuss that partnership. Now, I'm not pretending those discussions will be easier. They won't proceed in a straight line. There'll be zigs and zags, ups and downs. But as I said in my remarks, I will fight for the best deal for Canada, and only accept the best deal for Canada, and take as much time as necessary.
How does, though, Wendy, getting a deal with Canada perhaps be complicated by suggestions that Canada, for example, should become the 51st state?
Well, it's funny. Trump has stopped talking about that since the Canadian elections. And I think the fact that Justin Trudeau has moved off stage is very helpful toward getting some sort of talk going. They didn't have a good relationship. He was very angry at Donald Trump, and Donald Trump just kept goading him and calling him Governor Trudeau, and, you know, putting these really onerous tariffs, some of which he's backed off from. So now you have a fresh face and someone who is a central banker, someone who really knows the trade issues, and he's willing to come in. He says we're over the shock of the things that Donald Trump has said and done. He knows the Canadian-U.S. relationship is forever changed. That's his terminology, and he is ready to sort of start fresh under the parameters of this new relationship where Canada and the U.S. are not necessarily friendly neighbors anymore, but they are neighbors and they need to work together. And I think that's the way Carney is coming into this.
And finally, Wendy, one more subject for you today as we got something that the president has been suggesting might happen for some time, but confirmation, at least on Truth Social, we are going to be taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. He says, quote, "It's what they deserve." Does he actually have the legal authority to do that?
No. No, he doesn't. It's firmly in the law that a president cannot tell the IRS what to do, especially for political reasons. And this started, I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe this started in the Nixon administration when Richard Nixon wanted to punish political enemies by sticking the IRS on them and auditing them and things like that. So Trump is obviously, as I think all our viewers know, very angry at Harvard right now. They've apologized, although they've said they will not accede to his wishes for them to change their curriculum and things like that. So today, yes, he said what he's been wanting to say for a while, which is we want to take away your tax-exempt status. This is another process that takes years. I mean, the federal government just doesn't move at Donald Trump's preferred speed. And so it would have to be decided from within the IRS. It would take negotiations with Harvard. It would take a chance for Harvard to appeal any decision. Harvard, I'm quite sure, would sue. They've got a gang of lawyers, both conservatives and liberals, ready to take this on. And so it may happen. It probably won't happen by the time Trump's term ends.
All right. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, thank you very much. Of course, that story on Harvard, one of the most read on the Bloomberg terminal all day long, in addition to, of course, our coverage of the markets, which had another rally today on the heels of a better than expected jobs report. Growth robust in April. Actually, this was, the month of April. 177,000 on non-farm payrolls, which was hotter than expected. Unemployment holding steady at 4.2%. All this despite deep uncertainty over the president's trade policies. Economists still expect hiring plans to slow down over the coming months. And this morning on Bloomberg, Stephen Myron, the chair of the Council of the Economic Advisors at the White House, had this to say about today's economic data.
There's been an ongoing disconnect between the hard data and the soft data, and the hard data continued to perform very well. 177,000 jobs last month, a beat of 40,000 jobs. That's the president's second jobs day beat in a row. And on top of that, you've got 11,000 construction jobs, expanding construction sector in spite of the president's crackdown on the border.
Up ahead, the president acts on his threats against Harvard University, as we were just discussing. But up next, the competition for a U.S. Senate seat in Michigan is heating up. We'll bring you our conversation with one of the candidates, Michigan State Senator Mallory McGarrow, and how she's pushing for a party to adopt a new generation of leaders. Next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Today on the early edition of the program, we spoke with Mallory McGarrow, Michigan State Senator and now Democratic candidate for Michigan's U.S. Senate seat, or the one that will be open in 2026. This is what she told us about her campaign and why she's running.
My campaign is really centered on this idea of making a new American dream, acknowledging that we can't recreate the prosperity of our past by going backwards, and leaning into my own story. I'm a millennial who graduated right into the recession. I had no job prospects. I had no health insurance. I lived in the back of my car for a few nights, applied to 300 jobs, and I talked to Michiganders across this state who share that sentiment and frustration of having done everything right and still feeling like they're behind and they're not getting ahead and they don't have stability. So this is going to be about three things: success, safety, and sanity, and writing that new American dream together in a way that people can see themselves in, that isn't just about Donald Trump. It's not about, relitigating what he's doing or not doing. It's about what our future looks like.
Well, and we do want to get into the fact that you are a millennial and kind of the generational question now at play with the Democratic Party and what you might represent. But to touch back on your point around prosperity and what it will take to return it, for those who were gathered at the rally in Macomb County earlier this week as Donald Trump talked about the Reagan Democrats and the auto workers who he thinks his policies will benefit, what is your message to that particular part of Michigan's constituency that you are seeking to represent, who feel like these policies actually would serve to benefit them?
there is a world where a thoughtful trade policy, thoughtful tariff policy could do things like bring a third or fourth shift back on some of our manufacturing facilities that have laid workers off or have idled. But what we're seeing now is the broad, expansive tariffs that went on after the announcement of the auto tariffs on everyday goods, from clothes to coffee to bananas to diapers, is going to devastate workers. So the approach that I have, that I hope Michiganders hear, is that we have to be thoughtful as we put policy forward and not have this approach that I think we've seen out of the Trump administration of ready, fire, aim, of let's just announce things, see how they go. And I think Michigan, really for the rest of the country, is a canary in the coal mine. We saw some strong jobs numbers come out this morning. However, Michigan has the second highest increase in unemployment in the entire country. Our unemployment rate is sitting right now around 5.5%. We've seen layoffs at Stellantis, at suppliers, at small business owners, and we see that ripple effect play out where, over in Long Beach, the longshoremen put out a really critical, strong letter about the impact that this is going to have to jobs in the economy if we don't see some measuring in the approach to tariff policy. So I am heartened by some of the news out of Beijing that you just mentioned, but we're going to have to see some stability and not the chaos that we've seen so far.
You can find the full conversation with Democratic Michigan Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow online or on the terminal. Still ahead, we'll look forward to the one-on-one between the president and Canada's Mark Carney next week. But first, President Trump sends his Congress his budget proposal that would slash non-defense discretionary spending by 23%. We'll get reaction from Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is the best, they say, 100-day start of any president in history. In the coming weeks and months, we will pass the largest tax cuts in American history. Our golden age has only just begun.
President Trump earlier this week speaking at his 100 Days rally in Macomb County, Michigan, teasing his long-promised tax cuts, one of his major campaign pledges. And he keeps adding to them. This week, floating the possibility of eliminating taxes on income under $200,000 due to increased revenues from tariffs. But implementing that, or any other part of his plan, is up to lawmakers and Congress. And one of them is joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio, Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska, a member of the House Financial Services Committee and also vice chair of the Republican Main Street Caucus. Congressman, thanks for being here on Balance of Power. We have seen the punting of key markups in the Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means Committee from next week to the week following. When it comes to this reconciliation package, is the Speaker's goal of getting all of this done by Memorial Day no longer realistic?
Well, I've heard some talk that 4th of July might be a more reasonable deadline. Either way, it has to be done, as far as I'm concerned, before we go home for the August recess when we meet our constituents throughout the entire month. And I feel we can get there. I am on the Financial Services Committee, and we were successful in getting our bill marked up. Now, granted, it didn't cut the kind of government spending that the Energy and Commerce Committee will, or the heavy lifting the Ways and Means Committee will undertake, but it was a substantial first start, and other committees are doing the same. Listen, this is a major undertaking. Reconciliation has been the priority for the House of Representatives so far this year, and I'm confident we will get it done.
Well, you speak to the difficulty in Energy and Commerce. The big hang-up there, of course, is what to do about Medicaid. You come from a state in which more than 300,000 people, more than a third of them children, are enrolled in Medicaid. And I wonder what kind of cuts, if any, to the program you're willing to tolerate and what your colleagues in the Main Street Caucus are willing to tolerate.
Well, we're having that discussion right now. Obviously, there are folks on both sides of the spectrum. There are several of the people that signed that letter saying that they were concerned about deep cuts in Medicaid, some of which our Main Street members feel very strongly. There are other folks in the Main Street Caucus that want to be even more aggressive than what is being talked about in some ways. And so we are, much like the rest of the House of Representatives, spread across the spectrum. The reality is that I'm all for things like work requirements in a state like like mine, contributing to the entire federal government nationwide. That could be $2 to $250 billion in savings for the federal treasury. There's a variety of things that can be done. There's a focus on these provider tax payments that are under consideration. I think we can pretty easily get to $500 billion. The question is, how do we get to $880 billion, which is where I know a good section of the conference wants to be. I know Mr. Guthrie, who is in charge of the Energy and Commerce Committee, has asked to come see the Main Street Caucus and have some discussions next week so that he can tell us about some of their plans. I know they're working night and day. I feel like we're going to get there. This is going to be a painful journey, but at the end of the day, it will be worth it.
Well, when we consider what the light of the end of the tunnel, if you will, here, why you're going on this journey, it is to make permanent or at least extend the 2017 tax cuts. But I spoke about this with Mick Mulvaney, the former acting White House chief of staff in the first Trump administration, also a founding member of the House Freedom Caucus. And this is what he had to say about this current tax bill.
The bill is not a tax cut. The bill is an extension of the current tax rates. It's the prevention of a tax increase. You hear Donald Trump go on TV and say, I'm going to give you a huge tax cut. Technically, he's correct because the current law is that your taxes are going to go up, and he's preventing that from happening. But if you were expecting more money in your wallet, if this bill passes, you are going to be extraordinarily disappointed. And that's going to be a hard sell for the Republicans.
Congressman, can you honestly tell your constituents they will have more money at the end of this as we're considering whether or not some benefits may be cut?
Well, I think myself, like many other members of Congress, have been describing it exactly right. I say, if we don't act, the average Nebraska family will see a 20% tax hike. Your federal estate tax exemption will be cut in half, which makes it very difficult to pass on the family farm with the high land prices we have. But to depart from Mr. Mulvaney a bit, we are talking about some other tax cuts that would be new if they're implemented. That would, if we take no taxes on tips, or if we make progress on tax on Social Security, all of those discussions would be new in the realm of tax cuts. And I don't think anybody in the Ways and Means Committee have really showed their cards. They've been working night and day to try and find a solution. So until they release where they want to go, I think it's premature to say what will be or what will not be in that package.
When we consider your constituents, Congressman, you were one of the few brave House Republicans who actually did hold a town hall last month, and I know you got an earful on a number of matters. Did you take those as real concerns from your constituency? Did you think those people might be operatives, if you will, or did you take some of their messages to heart? And if so, what was your takeaway?
I did take some of their messages to heart. And no, most of the people there were from Lincoln, they were from Omaha, they were from Columbus, they were from communities around Columbus, Nebraska, and very happy to be able to do that. Here's what I heard, that most notable, there were a lot of concern that night about benefits and services of the VA hospital system and the VA health system. I intend to, in the August recess, tour all the VA facilities in my district. I've reached out to the leadership of the Veterans Administration, and I've invited the VA Secretary to address the Main Street group so that we can have an opportunity to check in on all of that. Making good on our promises to veterans was something that I heard loud and clear from that town hall, and I am acting on it. I also think there were a lot of people in that room, very good people that had a lot of concerns. One of the concerns they had was my Social Security benefits are going to get cut. That's absolutely not true. Under the Budget Reform Act of 1974, in the process of reconciliation, we are prohibited from touching Social Security benefits. But a lot of people in that room had that very well-heeled concern. So yes, I took some very good takeaways from it. There were also some people that wanted to create a scene, and I walked into that room and I told myself, I don't want anybody here to get arrested. I don't want anybody here to be taken out. I want them to be able to say what they want to say, and as long as everybody here feels safe, let's just muscle through this and let that energy come out. And at the end of the event, I had a number of people come up, say, you know what, I don't agree with you on anything, or I agree with you on a few things, but not everything, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and be heard.
Well, we thank you for taking the opportunity to join us here on Balance of Power tonight as well. Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska, who's the vice chair of the Republican Main Street Caucus. Thank you so much for joining us. He's also a radio guy, mind you, actually founded a few stations of his own. And on that news, the White House going to battle with PBS and NPR as the president signs an executive order defunding both. We'll have that up ahead. But up next, the U.S. adds a more than expected 177,000 jobs in April, despite uncertainty over the president's trade policies. We'll discuss the data with Daniel Hornung, former deputy director of the National Economic Council under the Biden administration, next on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons. April jobs data out this morning showing the labor market remains resilient with a stronger than expected 177,000 print on non-farm payrolls. And Stephen Myron, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, joined Bloomberg earlier today with his reaction to the figures.
There's been an ongoing disconnect between the hard data and the soft data, and the hard data continue to perform very well. 177,000 jobs last month, a beat of 40,000 jobs. That's the president's second jobs day beat in a row. And on top of that, you've got 11,000 construction jobs, expanding construction sector in spite of the president's crackdown on the border, disproving critics again. And the hard data continue to be okay. And I think it's worth emphasizing that these data represent the period after the president's historic actions with tariffs on April 2nd.
So, Stephen, we need to get into that because there are some people that we've spoken to that worry about the next report. They think that this could show up in the May report, and I've heard the words downside risks repeatedly. Are you confident that some of that's avoidable?
So, look, given the historic scope and speed with which the president acted to put American workers and firms first for the first time in decades, it shouldn't be surprising if there's some accompanying volatility, and that extends to financial markets that we've seen, and it could extend to economic data also as companies sort of substitute activity from one month to another. That remains to be seen. But so far in the hard data, we're not seeing any real evidence of that to be the case. And as you pointed out, there are various soft data sentiment indices that look not as good, but those tend to be influenced by financial markets, and there's been enormous volatility there lately, as you guys are aware, and they tend to be influenced a lot by politics. But historically, the correlation between those and activity has been weaker in the last few years than it would have been, say, 10 years ago.
You can find the full conversation with Stephen Myron, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, online or on the terminal. And for more analysis on today's jobs data, we turn now to Daniel Hornung. He's former deputy director of the National Economic Council during the Biden administration, now senior fellow at MIT, and is here with me in our Washington, D.C. studio. Good to see you. We just heard from Mr. Myron there, the suggestion that this is the second jobs report in a row that there's been a beat under Donald Trump. But President Trump himself said earlier this week that this is still Joe Biden's economy and stock market that we're working with. Whose economy is this really? Who gets the credit for any data we get?
It's a funny, very DC question. I think the reality is, if you look at the economy that President Trump inherited, it was an economy with roughly 3% growth, unemployment around 4%, inflation coming down towards 2%. And I think the chair of the CA is right that the hard data has not changed all that much. The thing that has changed a lot in the last 4 months is things like forecasts for growth, recession risks, what consumers are saying about the economy, what businesses are saying about the economy. And so the way that I think about today's report really is, it's true, it was a resilient report. There were some concerning signs like the downward revisions to past months. You're starting to see some federal layoffs associated with DOGE. But I think the question is, when do those tariff-induced price increases start to hit in a way that hits at incomes, hits at consumer spending, and starts to then really impact the labor market? And can the administration act quickly enough to reverse some of its tariff policies in order to prevent that from happening? Because if they can't, I think we are probably headed to a worse weakening in the labor market and likely a recession.
Well, so what is your assessment of when that could happen? Because already we're seeing port authorities. Gene Soroka, who runs one of the ports out off Los Angeles, was on earlier today talking about how already you're seeing cargo volume, ships coming from China. That is slowing down. And if they're not coming now, they're not bringing the goods that are needed for back to school season or Halloween, maybe even into Christmas. So how quickly could this actually catch up in the hard figures?
I think we're seeing some concerning leading indicators like the one you mentioned. We know anecdotally things like the de minimis exemption ending today could lead to price increases starting as soon as next week or a few weeks after that. And then it really is a cycle of things that should happen in the economy where first the prices go up, you see then the hits to real incomes, and that's when consumption starts to slow and businesses will hire less or conduct layoffs. And so I think there probably still is some time for the administration to move if they move very, very quickly. But it also takes a very long time for trade deals to happen, as you know. And so I think the important thing will be for them to signal some deals as quickly as possible. And then the big issue, of course, is China, where that really is where the reason why the effective tariff rate has gone up so much. And so you need quick resolution on that. And that's what I think most analysts would say is very, very difficult for this administration to get.
Well, you're starting to see maybe some more positive signals on China specifically, but President Trump obviously has been fielding a lot of questions about those negotiations with China and the impact of these tariffs overall. And he interestingly had this response earlier this week when asked about the potential for empty shelves as part of this. And this is what he said.
Somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
I don't know if you see that as recognition of just economic reality on the part of President Trump, but the fact of the matter is it might not just be dolls we're talking about. How could we see kind of an emptying of shelves of things that are critical to the U.S. economy or to the manufacturing sector specifically that the president says these policies are intended to reignite?
Yeah, well, it'll be things like dolls, the president mentioned, toys, appliances, clothes. The list really goes on. And, I think the comment somehow indicates, and other comments from the administration indicate that, maybe people should just buy less stuff or buy more expensive stuff, and that would be okay. I think it's really not that complicated. The reason people buy inexpensive things is because they don't make enough money to afford things that are more expensive. And so when you basically tell people that their prices are going to go up, but that's okay, what you're doing is lowering living standards for lower income people, middle income people, just the people who President Trump's economic message was really designed to appeal to.
Well, and he's kind of referred to that as being some short-term pain that might be experienced, or disruptions is another way that he's phrased this. All of it, he says, is in it trying to achieve a longer-term objective, which is more U.S. manufacturing, more balanced trade, potentially more in the Treasury's coffers. Do you see a way economically where actually that can all come about based off of these policies?
I think one of the challenges, the list that you gave, more manufacturing here, more revenue, those are contradictory. Are we trying to get more manufacturing in the United States? Are we trying to permanently replace the income tax? It's hard to know because you hear different things from different members of the administration. What I would say, if the goal is to try to produce more critical things in the United States, that's a very important goal that should be coupled with investment in key sectors. The challenge is when you say we're going to try to bring production of almost everything to the United States, what that will do is make people poorer, reduce corporate profits for businesses, and lead to a smaller economy where people's incomes are lower.
Well, and whether it's that economic reality we ultimately face or a different one, we all have the question as to how the Federal Reserve is going to respond to it. Now that you're outside of the White House apparatus, you're hopefully a little bit more free to answer this question.
I respect the independence, but go ahead.
Well, and President Trump says he has no intention of firing the chairman, but that hasn't stopped him from repeatedly saying that Powell risks being too late. He thinks they need to cut interest rates now, knowing that monetary policy and the rate mechanism itself will operate with a lag, that if they wait for the data in hand, by the time easier policy kicks in, it may not be able to have an immediate effect. Do you see a point to that argument? Is Chairman Powell going to end up being too late no matter what?
I think that President Trump has put Chairman Powell in a real bind, because the reality is that normally if we see labor market softening, what we would see alongside that is a benign inflation outlook that would make the choice quite easy to cut rates. But if what we see is a couple firm CPI and PCE readings on the good side, and maybe some labor market weakening that lags that higher inflation, I think it will be challenging for the Fed to act as quickly as they need to. And so that, I think, really speaks to the difficult position that President Trump and the tariff policies have put the Fed in.
If you got the chance to ask the chairman a question at his press conference next week, knowing he has to dance around a lot of tough questions these days, what does he most need to answer for? What do you want to hear from him?
I think I'd want to know when precisely the labor market weakening is enough that he would need to act regardless of where the inflation picture was. So, is it the unemployment rate going up? Is he going to act more quickly if we simply see some moves in the claims data as we did this week? I think that's going to be the most important question for him. I do think if I were Chair Powell, though, the most important question for me would be, when is President Trump going to act to more swiftly try to take some of these tariff rates down? Because without that, it's very hard to see much progress here.
Well, I'm not sure anyone except President Trump is able to answer that question. Daniel Hornung, former Deputy Director of the National Economic Council under the Biden administration, now Senior Fellow at MIT. Thank you. And President Trump says Harvard will lose its tax-exempt status as he escalates his feud with the university. We'll discuss that when we assemble our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think there need to be strong actions taken by the trustees of the university to very promptly and aggressively replace those in positions of administrative responsibility who take tendentious positions on issues.
Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary and former president of Harvard, reacting to a long-awaited report on anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bias at the university, which presented a scathing critique of how its students treated each other in the aftermath of the Hamas attack against Israel in 2023. Following the report, Harvard's president Alan Garber apologized for the university's failures and announced plans to focus on promoting respectful dialogue and revising policies. But that doesn't seem to be enough to tamp down its feud with the Trump administration. President Trump announcing on True Social today, quote, "We are going to be taking away Harvard's tax-exempt status. It's what they deserve." Joining me now with their reaction here on Bloomberg TV and radio is this evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and Democratic analyst, alongside Republican strategist Matt Gorman, executive vice president at Targeted Victory. Welcome to you both. Jeannie, you obviously work in academia, so I'll hit you with this one first. There's obviously a question of the president's legal authority to do this, but just by him trying, what message does it send?
It sends the message that this fight that he has taken to the elite universities, he is going to continue it. And, I think Larry Summers is absolutely right. Harvard, all elite institutions and any other institutions who engaged in practices that allowed for or supported or in any way anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim activities do need to take strict and serious steps to alleviate that and deal with it. And I think Harvard has taken that first step with the release of this report and the apology. But that doesn't give the president the right to remove their tax-exempt status merely by law, because the law says that the IRS can revoke it, but it can only do so on grounds for violation of the law or public policy. And in this case, they haven't shown either. So I don't think this holds up in court.
So as Jeannie kind of runs us through the legal question, Matt, as to whether or not the president has the legal authority to do this, whether they've shown that this move is justified, why start another court fight? Why is this fight with Harvard worth it? Why spend your political capital on this?
I don't think he spends much political capital on it, but I think it's been the playbook of much of his second term, where you're going to try and issue statements, executive orders that you know are going to get scrutiny in the courts. And maybe you don't get 100% of what you want. Maybe you get 80% or even 40%. It's 40% that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. balance. And I think this is one of those issues where he almost alluded to it last night when he was talking at the University of Alabama, using the Harvard Crimson and the Crimson Tide opposite to close out his speech. Going in front of the American people and taking tax-exempt status away from a university that has, I guess, what, billions of dollars in endowment.
Yeah, Harvard, more than 50 billion.
Exactly. It is something that is politically, it's one of those 80-20 issues that he's really kind of mastered these last couple months of getting on the right side of it and forcing people to defend him, not even on necessarily the actual grounds, but just on purely process grounds. It's a question of whether or not he can do it, not whether he should.
Well, I know that this is a popular story with our Bloomberg terminal audience. It's been one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg all day. But we have a very specific audience here. But you're essentially saying this is an 80-20 issue. Well beyond that, that this isn't just about elite institutions. He's tapping into something else.
Go to Iowa. Go to Texas. Go to most places in this country that aren't don't have Ivy League schools or are their median income might not be as high as you see in Cambridge, and tell them that a $50 billion endowment should be tax exempt. That Harvard should be tax exempt. The politics of it are pretty good.
Well, when we consider what else the president is spending his time doing, Jeannie, these days, he also signed an executive order last night pulling federal funding from NPR and PBS. Remember, back in March, he had shared his plans around this. This is what he said at the time.
Look at all the media you have right now. There's plenty of coverage. I was in.
And so it is a real problem. But even beyond that, what joins both of these cases together is something that people don't want to address in the Trump administration, which is the fact that he does not have the power to do either of these things. In the case of tax exempt, that is for the IRS. In the case of public funding, it is for Congress. So as much as he can make cases, and Matt's talking about, rightly so, that these may be popular in the case of Harvard, the reality is, popular or not, it is unconstitutional according to the framers of the Constitution, and this coming from a party that holds itself up as particularly concerned about original interpretations of the Constitution. It doesn't get any more original than funding comes from Congress, allocations come from Congress, and the law says the IRS is responsible for revocation of tax-exempt status. So, Mr. President, follow the law. Do it through Congress if you want to do it, but don't run around in a way that's unconstitutional.
Well, and when we consider, Matt, what Congress has actually appropriated, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is what they receive funds through, gets less than $500 million in federal funds. This is a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. It's a drop in the bucket for NPR, too. So why not just get rid of this boogeyman that they always, for Mitt Romney, we used that as a cudgel against them. I remember vividly the day after that terrible debate by Barack Obama, he was talking about Big Bird on the stump. To your point, exactly, if a percentage or 2 percentage points of their budget go away from Congress, it's not going to evaporate off TV screens across the country. My tax dollars don't pay for Bloomberg or NBC or ABC, and I can watch them all just fine. So I think it is something that it makes a lot of sense. I think it's popular, but also if I were NPR or PBS, just be rid of this forever if it really is a drop in the bucket to your overall budget.
Well, but when we consider that drop in the bucket, Jeannie, knowing that we came into the Trump White House with Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency saying we're going to find $2 trillion in spending cuts, we're going to be cutting here, looking at programs like PBS and NPR, does this not just speak to how hard it actually is to find substantive places to cut?
Oh, absolutely. We all know that trying to find cuts in D.C. is pretty much of a non-starter. Even holding the line one year to the next is a non-starter. And, I don't know, does the president really want to take up a campaign against Big Bird and Elmo? I appreciate that a small percentage of the public funding is coming from the government to NPR and a little bit more to PBS. But the reality is that it is up to Congress to allocate. And the president shouldn't be doing this in the middle of the night via EO. He should follow the Constitution and the law, and he should take a stand if he wants to, but do it following proper law and procedure.
And finally, Matt, as we close out this week in Washington here, this will go down as the week in which we saw the first real change-up in the Trump administration. Mike Waltz goes from National Security Advisor to now nominee for UN Ambassador. Marco Rubio is suddenly Secretary of State NSA, all at the same time. Do you think the president, as we face questions around the performance of Pete Hegseth, for example, is going to be eager for more turnover? Is this the last we'll see of it for a while?
This is precisely the reason why so many in the White House were very hesitant on giving the press, if you will, a quote-unquote scalp, right? Because all of a sudden the Waltz talk is kind of over. Okay, thanks for Mike Waltz. What about Pete Hegseth now? And then what about somebody else, right? So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy a little bit. I think, first of all, when it came to Waltz, he's been on tonight's for a little while. I think this both alleviates two problems. They obviously were kind of a little bit tired of him around the White House. It also sends him to New York, and it fills that UN ambassador role that Stefanik was supposed to have. But I think you're also right. It does take the heat off of other folks for a little bit, and we'll see where things go. You're right. This was notable, the first turnover of this administration just 100 days in.
Yeah, keeping in mind there were 6 acting or actual national security advisors in the first Trump White House. We now stand at 2. Jeannie Shanzano and Matt Gorman, thank you both so much for joining us. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is scheduled to meet with President Trump in Washington on Tuesday. We'll preview that meeting next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's important to get engaged immediately, which has always been my intention, has always been his intention. I go there with the expectation of constructive, difficult but constructive discussions. That's the spirit of the conversations that the president and I had. You go to these meetings well prepared, understanding the objectives of your counterpart, and always acting in the best interest of Canada, and we'll go from there.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney previewing his message to President Trump when the two meet at the White House on Tuesday. Just one of a number of events we'll be watching next week, in addition to the Milken Institute Global Conference, which begins Monday in Los Angeles. We'll have coverage of it all week long, including interviews with Apollo's Mark Rowan, Citi CEO Jane Fraser, the U.S. Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, and others. So enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you back for coverage next week right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Good Friday morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Stock futures gain on signs of a thawing in the US-China trade standoff. Beijing says it is evaluating direct talks with Washington. Cloudy forecast. Amazon says it is bracing for a tougher business climate in the coming months, while Apple slumps in late trade on slower sales in China and a warning on tariffs. Plus, Standard Chartered reports a first quarter profit beat driven by its financial markets and wealth units. I'll be speaking with the bank's CFO later this hour. We will break earnings from NatWest and oil giant Shell. European markets set to reopen after the holiday yesterday for most of those markets with a bang then. Set for 8 straight days of gains if the futures turn out, of course, to be reflected in the session later today, pointing up by 1.4%. So you could end Friday with 8 straight days of gains for European stocks. US stocks have already gone through that cycle. They are set now on US futures for 9 straight days of gains. That would be the biggest winning streak we've seen for a number of years. And we'll get the context from Valerie Titel, who's going to break that down for us. FTSE 100 futures currently pointed gains of 0.6%. We're looking at some local elections in the UK as well, so an eye on the pound. S&P futures stateside looking to add 0.8% despite the disappointment coming through for the likes of Apple and Amazon. So the tech trade, some question marks there. When it comes to the Nasdaq 100 futures, despite that, looking up as well by 0.6%. It seems like the rhetoric around trade is more squarely in focus. Let's flip the board and have a look across asset. We do have the macro data, of course, and the focus on non-farm payrolls. That print out later today. Unemployment expected expected to remain at 4.2%. Watch the hourly earnings, though. That could be important as markets continue to assess where the Fed goes from here in potentially a high inflation environment and possibly some cracks in the labour market. 422 right now on the benchmark. 10-year yields moving just 1 basis point. Euro dollar at 113, gaining on softer dollar, just up 0.1%. Brent in focus again. Some additional threats coming through from the Trump administration around Iran and oil there. $62 a barrel on Brent. Gold at 3,249, up 0.3 after some selling pressure yesterday for the yellow metal. Briefly checking in on the Asian markets. The lift is coming through then on the lines from China, hinting, signaling, suggesting that they are edging, inching closer to some kind of conversation with the US about this trade war. Broadly across the benchmark, you're seeing gains then in Asia of 1.5%. Mainland markets are closed in China. The HSI index, though, reflecting that optimism, up 1.7% in the session so far. The Nikkei in Japan up 1.2%, and the Japanese yen largely unchanged, 145. The BOJ yesterday, of course, and the commentary. Let's get to the details then on what China has been saying. Says it is assessing now the possibility of trade talks with the US, citing senior US officials' willingness to discuss tariffs. Speaking on Fox News, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says China wants to come to the negotiating table.
Can we reach some sort of short-term accommodation with them? That's what they want. I mean, the Chinese are reaching out. They want to meet. They want to talk.
Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries joins us now. Bill, let's start on what we've been hearing from China. What do we read into the China messaging now on these potential beginnings of some form of talks around trade?
Yeah, you really do have to kind of read between the lines here to see what exactly is China saying, and is it that different from what they've been. That's right. I mean, Japanese officials signaling that they would like to see the talks that have been taking place so far accelerate beginning in the middle of May. There is a good chance that the Japanese and U.S. leadership will be at an international summit in June, so there's a reason to get those talks moving ahead. U.S. officials have always said that they think Japan, as well as India, are at the top of the list. The big thing here, though, is that whatever the deal means for Japan, it's going to be looked at as a model for all the other countries trying to get some sort of agreement in place before that 90-day reprieve ends or expires at the end of July. So there's a lot riding on that first deal, and there's going to be a lot of interest in how much of it is about tariffs, how much of it is about non-tariff barriers, and how much maybe is just about investments in the U.S.
Okay, Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferries, thank you very much indeed. With the European Union as well putting forth their proposals, and we'll see what the response is from the Trump administration to the EU's latest overtures. Meanwhile, from the top line in terms of the tariff discussion to what is actually the impact right now at a corporate level, because we got some details and colour from Apple and Amazon with their earnings, of course. Both companies slumping after their latest quarterly reports failed to quell those investor concerns about tech and tariffs. Speaking on the earnings call, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy addressed the current trade uncertainty.
Obviously, none of us knows exactly where tariffs will settle or when. We haven't seen any attenuation of demand yet. To some extent, we've seen some heightened buying in certain categories that may indicate stocking up in advance of any potential tariff impact.
Meanwhile, Apple's China sales disappointed, and it warned of damage from the trade war. Bloomberg's Charlie Wells joins me now. Been looking at both companies' results and, of course, the lens on what is happening in terms of the impact of tariffs and the trade war. Let's start with Apple. What did CEO Tim Cook have to say about the tariff impact for them?
Not good things, Tom. So, everyone cares, about the prior quarter, but they care even more about the current one. Yeah. And what Cook said yesterday was that tariffs could hit the company to the tune of $900 million. And that is not what investors wanted to hear. And I think what investors also didn't want to hear was about this softness in China, right? China is such an important market for this company, not just because of the production. We know production is under strain because of this tariff uncertainty, but also on the sales front, right? It's the third most important market there. They've seen a slowdown. This used to be a growth market, but sales were down 2.3% on the back of AI, kind of lag, and just the fact that they have so much more competition from local smartphone makers. years now. So not great for this firm.
I mean, Chinese smartphone makers, Xiaomi, Huawei, they've had foldable phones for 5 years. Apple says it's going to have one on the market in China, what, in a year's time or something? They don't have a real AI story to tell in China either. But there you go. There's the number. Almost $1 billion from the tariff hit. That's just so far for Apple. What about Amazon? What did you read into this? AWS, disappointing a little bit. That's central as well, but the supply chain story important for Amazon.
The supply chain story isn't important. I think a lot of people have been talking about that, the tariff issue here. They rely, again, so much on China. But then also, the services part of Amazon is really important. So that AWS unit brings in a significant amount of profit for this company. And they saw growth, but it was slower growth than they've seen in the previous quarter, And that contrasted to some of the really strong growth in cloud that we saw at Microsoft yesterday. And so this kind of indicates that, again, there's just more competition in this space that could take a hit on the company.
You've been looking at all the tech earnings that have come through so far this week. It's a little unfair to put them all in the Mag 7 basket right now because they're all facing different challenges, some performing and outperforming others quite considerably. And we've seen that reflected in the results today. What for you has kind of stood out in terms of how mega cap tech is performing?
This was always going to be the harder part of tech earnings season because it is the hardware or the retail side of that Mag 7. We had really good results from the more software-leaning companies. And so I think just remembering that there's this divergence that is emerging and that could continue to emerge if this trade uncertainty stays, I think that's something that investors are going to have to focus on.
Charlie Wells, excellent wrap of what's been going on in the tech space with the earnings coming through and what it tells us about the direct impact, of course, of tariffs. Charlie, thank you. Now, markets are welcoming that potential thawing then in the US-China trade standoff with all the caveats, of course. Asian stocks and Wall Street futures then getting a boost this morning, as we mentioned. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel right now for the size and scope. Val, what a performance for the S&P. 8 straight days of gains. We could be set for a 9th straight day of upside for the S&P 500.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. I'll try to temper my enthusiasm because I'm definitely feeling the bullishness of this U.S. equity market this morning. S&P 500 notching 8 straight days of gains, and take a look at the futures move. We might just be able to make it 9. We are up almost 10% now in the last 9 sessions, and this really could be one for the history books, Tom. Let's flip on and just compare how this streak compares to history, because if we end in the green today, that would be the longest streak for the U.S. equity market in 20 years. We have to go back to all the way to November 2004 to find a comparable run, and I don't want to jinx it, Tom, but the next superlative comes at 12 days. We have to go all the way back to the 90s for that. 14 days is the longest on record. That happened all the way back in 1971. So that's the setup for the equity market here. If we end in the green today, the longest streak in 20 years, but the streak has ended for the Treasury market. We had seen a solid pace of gains for the Treasury market that came to an end yesterday. We saw a surprising repricing in the front end. Those 2-year yields rose around 10 basis points in yesterday's session, Tom, but it was all down to good news. We had a positive reading on the ISM manufacturing component and some big strength in the new orders component, the more forward-looking component of ISM. So that strong data yesterday really starting to maybe us rethink whether we need those 4 rate cuts from the Federal Reserve this year. There was a lot of volumes going through in the Treasury market yesterday. We saw some decent block trades in the front end as we repriced the Fed's path forward.
Yeah, the next cut of 25 basis points not fully priced until July right now by these markets. We'll see how that adjusts. On the data today, non-farm payrolls, what are you looking at in terms of the data set and whether or not we're going to see some real softness in the labour market?
Well, look, Tom, for this market, I think the risk is really for a lower print. I think the market is very much likely to shrug off a stronger print, just saying this was pre-tariff data. We're not going to give it too much weight. A lot of economists out there saying that this April's print could really be the last solid print for the U.S. labor market, expecting to see some labor market weakness because of the tariffs, but maybe not until the May or the June print later this summer. But we are expected 135K consensus for today's print. The unemployment rate is expected to stay steady at 4.2%. The Fed really does have their eye on the unemployment rate. If we do get an unexpected rise in the unemployment rate, perhaps that could soften Powell's language next week. The Fed does have a decision on May 7th. They are likely to stay on hold.
Okay, Bloomberg's very set up with an excellent setup there for the non-farm payrolls data coming up later today, which of course the team will break for you with the analysis through the US trading hours. Here's what else to think about then today before we get to that point. On the earnings front, 7 a.m. UK time, we're going to be breaking the numbers from Shell. All the volatility, of course, around the oil prices. Oil prices, what, around 4-year lows right now, $60 a barrel. Citi saying you could get below $50 a barrel, depending on additional production coming through from OPEC+. So Shell earnings, a gauge, of course, on that demand picture and arguably on the trade story as well. Those numbers dropping at 7 a.m. UK time. At 10 a.m., we're going to get the Euro area CPI data. So the inflation read across the Euro area, that is at 10 a.m. UK time. Of course, the ECB is fully expected to continue its rate-cutting moves through this year. Is the progress still being made to that 2% target for the ECB? So far, it has been on something of a glide path lower on inflation. 1:30 p.m. UK time, it is, of course, non-farm payrolls. You've had the setup there from Valerie Titel. The look at average hourly earnings, the unemployment rate expected to remain on hold at 4.2%. Is that adjusted higher? And if so, does that change expectations around the Fed? Those numbers dropping at 1:30 p.m. You can get a roundup of the stories you need to know to get your day going in today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can go to DAYB Go on the terminal. Coming up, Standard Chartered profits beat. We're going to discuss the results with the bank's CFO. That is at 6:30 a.m. UK time. Stay with us for that conversation. Plenty more coming up between then and now. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
There's a core underlying structure of German banking that is not helpful to anybody trying to create a sort of a broader retail platform. And so I would be in favor of some consolidation, some bigger European banks. Some of the colleagues here might say, well, no, we don't want them competing. What are you talking about? But I think the pie will be bigger.
And that was Bernie Mensah, Bank of America's president of International, speaking to Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix, of course, making the call for more banking consolidation in the space. We see some moves around that.
With sort of guidance, what can happen in trade, severe scenario to the revenue, and what can do cost of risk. Standard Chartered took a little bit different approach. They talk about diversified network income, resilience of the trade income, opportunities coming from the changes that's coming at the moment, or the volatility, and cost of risk increased just 23 million compared to 150 versus HSBC. And that also will be something we're going to be questioning management during the earnings call today.
Yeah, and I got a sense of caution as well when I spoke to Sergio Monti of UBS on just that front. Their team, of course, coming through with a record quarter as a result of volatility in the market side. But he was certainly cautious in terms of what it means for CapEx spending, corporate investment going forward. What is your lens, with your analyst lens, on what is happening in around tariffs, the impact on banks? Where does that leave your view?
Well, two, let's say, channels to impact of the tariffs and trade wars risk for banks. It's revenue and it's cost of risk. Not enough flows, not enough capex, of course, is affecting the banks' capital markets, the financial market activity. Yes, 1Q was very strong because of the volatility, but what's going to happen in the second quarter, we don't know. Standard Chartered pointed out that the second quarter started quite strong as well for them, so there seems to be positive momentum, but is it sustainable? No, this is a very interesting question to understand the revenue trajectory in the next few quarters.
NatWest reporting, 7 a.m. UK time. What are you watching for?
I would be watching definitely for net interest margin performance, revenue, strong revenue momentum with UK banks. Lloyds yesterday reported relatively strong NII, good revenue momentum because of the structural hedges. And we know UK banks, they have those structural hedges which are really distinguishing them from European peers. It's a very good revenue stream and it's supporting revenue for the next 2 years. It's supporting the ROTE guidance. So I believe that NatWest will maintain their ROTE guidance. Maybe they will top up as well some provisions like Lloyds did for uncertainty coming from economic activities. We're going to look at exposure to US tariff or to companies exposed to US tariffs. That possibly they will discuss this as well. And mortgage war in the UK. We know it is intensifying, and Lloyds yesterday confirmed that the spreads will be a little bit tighter because new price war is coming in the second quarter. But all in all, I think the story should be relatively positive as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Breaking down, Thomas, for us. What have we seen certainly so far? The impact, of course, of tariffs. And looking ahead to NatWest and expecting some pretty decent numbers. They drop at 7 a.m. We'll see if that that confirms, of course, your view. Thomas Nersel, Senior Bank Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, with that analysis. Thank you. I'm going to be speaking to the CFO of Standard Chartered. That's at 6:30 UK time, so in about 8-9 minutes time. So stay tuned for that conversation as well. Now, some other stories making the news this Friday. In the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer's governing Labour Party has lost a parliamentary by-election to the Reform UK Party, led by Nigel Farage. Labour went into the election defending a majority of more than 1,400 votes at the seat near Liverpool. Among their safest, the 6-vote margin of victory for Reform was one of the tightest in British electoral history, if not the tightest, according to the BBC. And London luxury department store Harrods has reported hacking attempts just days after 2 other UK retailers said they were targeted. Harrods says it's taken steps to keep systems safe and has restricted internet access at its sites, but stores remain open. Marks & Spencer Group has recently been battling a cyber incident that rendered some of its systems inaccessible. And Moët Hennessy plans to cut its workforce down to 2019 levels as the wine and spirits division of luxury giant LVMH faces lackluster US demand and a tariff standoff between the EU and China. A company spokesperson told Bloomberg that the reduction in headcount would be achieved through natural turnover and not renewing vacant positions. Moët Hennessy has been facing headwinds after China imposed anti-dumping measures on cognac in retaliation to the EU's crackdown on Chinese EVs last year. Coming up, talking of EVs, Elon Musk marks 100 days of one of his biggest bets yet. We're going to look at his role working alongside President Trump and its impact in Washington and, of course, the impact on his companies. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Well, since Donald Trump returned to the White House, Elon Musk, of course, has been a scene stealer, gutting government agencies and sparking litigation. But Doge hasn't fully lived up to its billing, while Tesla has, of course, become collateral damage. That is the topic of our weekly doc.
The marriage of money and power is nothing new, but the arrangement between billionaire Elon Musk and President Donald Trump is like no other in the history of U.S. politics.
They're buddies. That's probably a good description, at least how Elon Musk sees it.
Donald Trump needs his fall guy, but he also needs the bulldogs, and sometimes they're the same person.
It's been a crazy 100 days.
You look around at the U.S. government right now and you see friends and allies of Elon Musk in all these various departments and all these various top leadership roles.
Trump has been able to get Elon Musk to help propel through all the changes that were spelled out in Project 2025, a blueprint for reshaping the government.
In Doge's mind, they have been wildly successful. And on the flip side, there is a cost to laying off federal workers, to fighting all of this litigation in court.
Musk is known for his uncanny ability to play a long game, but he may not have expected so much public blowback.
So Tesla's sales really dropped. Their first quarter sales were 13% lower than the quarter a year ago.
Starting in May, my time allocation to Doge will drop significantly.
As Musk pivots, the struggles surrounding Doge's actions continue, while many Americans are reeling from a tumultuous 100 days.
Musk isn't really leaving the Trump administration.
It's not like Doge is ending. I mean, Doge is a project that's supposed to continue until July 2026.
One thing we've learned over this last 100 days is that there is going to be a huge cost to Elon Musk for doing the things he's doing. He has basically taken his personal brand and tarnished it. And that's what happens when you put yourself front and center of some extremely controversial and often unpopular policies.
Okay, we're going to switch focus in the next couple of minutes because Standard Chartered reports better than expected first quarter profit. I'm going to be speaking to company CFO DavidYeo. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Stock futures gain on signs of a thawing in the US-China trade standoff. Beijing says it is evaluating direct talks with Washington. Cloudy forecast, Amazon says it is bracing for a tougher business climate in the coming months, while Apple slumps in late trade on slower sales in China and a warning on tariffs. Plus, Standard Chartered reports a first quarter profits beat driven by its financial markets and wealth units. We're going to be speaking to the bank's CFO in just the next couple of minutes. Let's check in on the markets then. European markets reopening, of course, after the holiday for most markets yesterday, and certainly on the front foot, being flagged by this futures gains of 1.3%. You're set for 8 straight days of gains for European equities if this plays out. You've already had that stateside. You could be on to 9 straight days of gains, which would be the longest run in the streak we've seen for about 20 years for the S&P 500. FTSE 100 futures from the gains of 0.6%. S&P futures, again, looking to build on the upside of yesterday, up 0.7%. NASDAQ 100 futures looking to add 101 points, despite the disappointment coming through around the earnings from Apple and Amazon. Let's flip the board and have a look cross-asset. Non-farm payrolls dropping later today. Keep an eye, of course, on the unemployment rate. Top-line number expected to soften from the previous month, and average hourly earnings in focus as markets start to assess where the Fed goes from here in terms of that competition around inflation and the jobs market stateside. 422 right now on the benchmark 10-year, 113 on euro-dollar. Brent trading at $62 a barrel, up 0.6%. And gold with some gains after the losses of yesterday, up 0.4% on the yellow metal. Let's get back to the earnings story with the lens, of course, on banks, because Standard Chartered's profit, as we mentioned, has beaten in the first quarter, driven by the bank's financial markets and wealth units. But the London-based lender is warning of the potential impacts from President Trump's trade war. Very pleased to say I'm joined now by Diego De Giorgi, CFO of Standard Chartered. Diego, thanks so much for joining us in the studio. Top line, good set of results. Let's focus on the here and now. What do you see in terms of the trade impact right now, the tariff impact on activity across the bank? How is that percolating through the numbers that you're seeing and have been seeing in recent days and weeks?
Absolutely. So look, the recent results, as you say, this quarter are less in focus, but they clearly set us up very well for this environment.
Thank you for that assistance. How do you compete? How do you balance that versus the competition of possibly a slowdown in trade volumes as a result of the uncertainty? Does one offset the other?
So, first of all, let's put into perspective that what we are really is we are a giant connector bank between our fast-growing regions in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, and the rest of the world. Trade is important as an activity, but it's less than 5% of the revenues of the bank overall. So what we are really focused on is on, as you say, making sure that our clients continue to adjust either their financial lives, if they are wealth management clients, or really continue to diversify their supply chains, an activity that they have been doing for years, but that has clearly accelerated.
How much cross-border revenue, though, do you think is potentially at risk as you look out?
So we have in our results for this quarter, we've tried to be helpful to our investors and to our shareholders in explaining a little bit how our exposure across the network works. The reality is that our network is so diversified. The 175 years of investments and the 53 countries we operate in mean that the shifts are really shifts in direction, but the overall growth of the fastest regions of the world remains a structural trend that remains very powerful.
Are you seeing money flows moving? Are you seeing money flows moving in a substantial way out of the US to other jurisdictions?
Very interesting. We have asked ourselves this question and we've looked. We don't see evidence of real asset reallocation away from the US or away from the dollar. We are seeing it mostly, as I said, in the nature of the investments. The investments in the short term are becoming more defensive.
What are the best growth markets for wealth right now? Do you see inflows continuing at the levels they're at now? And where are the best growth markets when it comes to that unit?
Oh, our most active markets continue to be the largest financial centers in our regions, which are fundamentally Hong Kong, Singapore, and Dubai.
But is there one that's standing out from the others right now?
Hong Kong has had a record quarter, so they're clearly doing very well. In terms of our corridors of wealth, but also of capital and of trade, all of the corridors going into the Middle East are particularly strong.
You and the team at Standard Chartered, you understand Chinese policy making very well. You understand that economy very well. Has the Trump administration miscalculated in their standoff with Beijing?
So China enters this situation, this uncertain environment, on the back of a period of relative slowdown in which the government had already started to deploy tools to help the economy. Those tools had been mostly monetary tools and mostly directed towards manufacturing. What is happening is that there is a continued shift towards helping the consumer. There is a continued ratcheting up of the measures that support the economy. And importantly, I would say, if you think about the world more at large, there's a couple of countries, of which China is one, Germany is another one, where the ability to pull the fiscal lever is very strong with the government, and China is one of them.
What is your level of confidence around credit impairments remaining at current levels as you push forward, whether it's in China or elsewhere on slower growth?
So they've been the credit environment has been very good for us, and this quarter is the first quarter in 5 quarters that we report any net credit impairments in our corporate and investment bank, to give you a sense. Having said that, the credit cycle is a long cycle, and we are very much in the initial innings of an uncertain end situation. What gives us confidence in terms of where we will end is that whichever state the world will end in, the world will be definitely more complex. The world will have more need, our clients will have more need of our services, and our clients will want access to that unique asset that is our diversified network more and more.
It is complicated. There is that complexity. And yet you are committing to that $8 billion in terms of returns to shareholders by 2026. What is your level of confidence in that commitment? What potentially derails that?
So we are in uncertain environments, and that's why it's good to enter this environment with a strong balance sheet, with ample liquidity, with the profit generation engines. Because our profit generation engines are strong and continue to fire well, and we have already returned $5 billion out of that $8 billion in the first slightly more than a year of the 3 years that we have of time, we remain very confident.
You remain very confident in that $8 billion total. You've done $5 billion, you've got another $3 billion to go. When it comes to cost cutting, the Fit for Growth program, a lot of that cost cutting is going to come through, a lot of the action is going to come through this year. Where are you focused in terms of specifically meeting those targets? What additional changes are going to come through for the bank, and what does it mean for headcount?
So Fit for Growth has very much been a program of transformation. It has obviously good implications on the long-term cost trajectory of the bank, but it's really a program that aims to change the way that we do certain processes and a lot of the things that we do inside the bank and with our clients end to end. If I have to tell you what is the biggest change since a year and a couple of months that we announced it, is that AI is increasing its importance in a lot of the forms, in a lot of the efforts that we are putting in. And some of them are the more sexy efforts, the ones that go toward our consumers, our clients, but a lot of activity is what you don't see, and it's what is going on below the water internally in the bank in terms of how we use AI to power our processes.
Okay, so AI is real, and it's part of the Fit for Growth project for you. Additional cuts to jobs in the coming months?
We've never characterized Fit for Growth as a headcount program because we are naturally present across a very different environment.
It's part of the program, right? I mean, are we going to see further reductions in headcounts in coming months?
Look, as technology continues to evolve, the direction of travel for the banking industry is not toward an increase in headcount, but again, I would stress it's not one of the key focuses of Fit for Growth.
Okay, Diego, thank you very much indeed. On the back of a beat in terms of first quarter earnings and a view there in terms of the potential tariff impact and how clients are positioning. Standard Chartered Group CFO Diego De Giorgi with the comments, of course, on the back of those earnings. Let's bring you the latest when it comes to the trade story, the specificity now around Temu, which, of course, is one of these e-commerce giants that ships into the US market. We know that the de minimis loophole has now been closed. That came through in the last couple of hours, so that below $800 rule has now been closed. So the likes, of course, of Temu and others, of course, Shein, another one, have to now hit and absorb those tariffs. They are now saying that they are and have recently transitioned their US operations to a local fulfillment model. This means all sales in the US are now being handled by locally based sellers. Temu's pricing for US consumers remains unchanged, so not changing their pricing for US consumers, at least for now. So that's the immediate reaction coming through on the back of that ending of the de minimis rule that came in a couple of hours ago. Now, some other stories making the news this Friday. President Trump says he will nominate Mike Waltz, his current national security advisor, to be the next US ambassador to the UN. The move sidelines Waltz, the top aide who drew a wave of criticism for inadvertently adding a journalist to a Signal group chat where officials discussed sensitive military plans. Marco Rubio is to serve as interim national security advisor while keeping his job as Secretary of State. And President Trump has imposed, or has threatened to impose, secondary sanctions on nations or companies buying Iranian oil. The move targets a major revenue source for Iran and comes as nuclear talks planned for this weekend are postponed. Sanctions could also further inflame tensions with China and the UAE, both of which buy petroleum products from Iran. Coming up, investors prepare for the crucial jobs report due out later today. We're going to discuss what to expect with Jane Foley, head of FX strategy at Rabobank, and how to position around the dollar. That is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Investors are turning their attention to US jobs data later today as S&P futures point to essentially a ninth straight day of gains. Let's bring in Jane Foley, FX strategist, head at Rabobank. Jane, thank you for joining us this morning. What do you expect to learn about the labour market of the US from the non-farm payrolls later today? Are you getting a sense, is the data telling you that we're starting to see a softness there, and how is that being factored in to expectations around the dollar?
We did see that yesterday, of course, in initial claims, and I think the market has been waiting to see this softness coming through. But in a way, that means that the risks to this data really, and I think this is for most US data over the last few weeks, has been sort of one-sided, because if the data comes out better than expected, the market tends to think, well, you know, this is sort of pre-tariffs numbers, it doesn't really count. And yet, if the data is to come in weak, the market will think, oh, yes, you know, this is the start of this concern, you know, that the elements of a recession building, you know, could be seen in this data. So there is a one-sided risk. A softer data probably going to be taken a little bit more seriously than a stronger than expected number, if that's what we get. But there are, you know, the expectations for this number do suggest that the market is expecting to see a slowdown in the US labour market.
The dollar is down about, 9% year to date versus the euro. All the kind of hand-wringing about the fundamentals of the US, the risk premium that needs to be priced in, some would say, to the US currency.